The HOA tried to bulldoze my house. Now they're paying me $500,000. They harassed me, fined me, vandalized my home, then sent a demolition crew to destroy it. But I fought back, sued them for harassment, and now? Their president resigned in disgrace, their board is bankrupt, and I walked away with $500,000. They tried to ruin me. Now they're the ones who lost everything. For as long as he could remember, Jerry Parker had dreamed of owning a quiet place away from the noise, stress, and chaos of city life. After spending over a decade working long hours as a software engineer, he finally had the savings to turn that dream into reality. No more honking cars, crowded sidewalks, or neighbors arguing through paper-thin walls. He wanted a sanctuary, a place where he could breathe. Jerry spent months searching for the perfect retreat, scrolling through real estate listings late into the night, driving out on weekends to tour properties that never quite matched his vision. Some were too expensive, others too small, and many were buried under the watchful eye of homeowners associations, HOAs, something Jerry wanted to avoid at all costs. He had read the horror stories online: unreasonable fines, ridiculous rules, power-hungry board members. No, thank you. Then one day, he found it. Tucked away in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood at the edge of town, the house looked like something out of a postcard. It wasn't a massive estate or a luxury cabin, but it was perfect. A cozy, well-built home with a large deck that overlooked a small, winding creek. The listing described it as a hidden gem, and for once, the description wasn't an exaggeration. But what truly sealed the deal for Jerry was one small but crucial detail: the property sat just outside the HOA's jurisdiction. The neighborhood was managed by a homeowners association, but this particular house, due to a quirk in zoning, was not legally part of it. That meant no absurd restrictions, no nosy committees, and no monthly fees for services he didn't want. Excited, Jerry scheduled a tour. The seller, Paul Whitman, was a retired carpenter in his 60s, with a firm handshake and the weathered look of a man who had spent years working with his hands. Paul had built the house himself years ago, choosing the location specifically because it was outside the reach of the HOA. "Best decision I ever made," Paul said as they walked through the property. "I watched my neighbors deal with the HOA nonsense for years. Petty fines, ridiculous rules, a bunch of people with nothing better to do than tell others how to live. Me? I wanted my freedom." Jerry immediately liked him. They spent nearly an hour talking, as Paul pointed out the home's sturdy construction, the reinforced deck, and the way the towering trees provided natural privacy. He clearly took pride in the house, and Jerry could feel it. This place had been built with care. "This isn't just a home," Paul said, stepping onto the deck and looking out at the trees. "It's freedom." Jerry didn't need any more convincing. Within weeks, he had finalized the paperwork, conducted a thorough inspection, and confirmed with local authorities that the property was legally outside the HOA's control. The day he got the keys, he felt a rush of excitement. This was his now. His perfect escape. As he drove away from the city toward his new retreat, he could already imagine the weekends ahead, unplugging from work, drinking coffee on the deck, falling asleep to the sounds of nature instead of sirens. This was exactly what he needed. Jerry had no idea that his dream home was about to become a battleground. Jerry's first few weeks in his new home were exactly what he had hoped for. Peaceful, quiet, the kind of stillness that let him hear the rustling of the trees and the distant trickle of the creek behind his house. It was a stark contrast to the relentless noise of the city, and every evening he found himself on the deck, a cold drink in hand, watching the sun dip below the treetops. He spent his first weekend unpacking, setting up his workspace, and taking long walks through the neighborhood. The houses were nice, well-kept lawns, clean driveways, fresh paint, but there was something almost uniform about them. The few neighbors he saw were polite but distant. A couple of older couples waved as they passed, and a middle-aged man watering his lawn gave him a quick nod before turning away. No one stopped to introduce themselves, and Jerry got the distinct impression that while they noticed him, they weren't in a hurry to welcome him. At first, he didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just a quiet neighborhood. Maybe they weren't used to new people. That was fine. He wasn't here to make best friends. He just wanted to enjoy his home and mind his own business. Then, the letter arrived. One evening, after returning from a grocery run, Jerry found a crisp white envelope in his mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just his name printed neatly across the front. He opened it as he walked up the driveway and immediately frowned. The letterhead bore the official seal of the Homeowners Association. "Dear Mr. Parker, welcome to our wonderful community. As you may know, our neighborhood is managed by the Lakeside Homeowners Association, LHA, to ensure high standards of property maintenance, safety, and community engagement. As a homeowner, we strongly encourage you to become a member. Membership grants access to community benefits such as neighborhood recreational facilities, seasonal events and activities, collective maintenance of common areas. Involvement in the HOA helps protect property values and ensures our neighborhood remains a beautiful and cohesive place to live. A representative from the board will be in touch soon to discuss your membership. We look forward to your participation. Warm regards, Brenda Holloway, President, Lakeside Homeowners Association. Jerry read it twice, his frown deepening. The language was friendly, but there was something off about it. Nowhere did it explicitly say membership was required, yet the way it was worded made it sound like an obligation rather than a choice. Jerry wasn't about to take chances. The very next morning, he called his lawyer. Jonathan, his attorney, had already reviewed the property documents during the purchase process, but Jerry wanted to be absolutely sure there was no legal loophole the HOA could use to force him into joining. "Don't worry," Jonathan reassured him. "I checked everything before you bought the place. The HOA has zero legal authority over your property. You don't have to join, you don't have to pay fees, and you don't have to follow their rules. If they try to push you, let me know." That was all Jerry needed to hear. That evening, he drafted a polite but firm response. "Dear Ms. Holloway, thank you for the warm welcome. I appreciate the invitation. However, my property is not legally within the jurisdiction of the HOA, and I have no obligation to join. While I respect the work the HOA does for the community, I will not be participating as a member. Best, Jerry Parker." He sent the letter, assuming that was the end of it. He was wrong. At first, Jerry thought the matter was settled. He had declined the invitation, made it clear he wasn't interested, and assumed the HOA would move on. But within a week, another letter arrived. This one was less friendly. The tone had shifted from warm welcome to firm insistence. It outlined the importance of community participation and maintaining neighborhood standards, heavily implying that opting out wasn't really an option. It ended with a line that made Jerry's stomach tighten. "Non-compliance with community standards may lead to unnecessary complications." He shook his head and tossed the letter in a drawer. Let them send as many as they wanted. He wasn't legally bound to follow their rules. But the letters kept coming. Each one ramped up the pressure. Some emphasized how residents who choose not to contribute were hurting the neighborhood. Others listed mandatory maintenance standards he was allegedly violating. His lawn wasn't trimmed to HOA specifications. His trash bins weren't stored properly. His deck didn't match the aesthetic harmony of the community. Jerry knew it was nonsense. His lawn was neat, his bins were where they belonged, and his deck had been the same color for years. He ignored the notices, but the harassment didn't stop there. Neighbors who had previously just ignored him now seemed to be watching him. He'd catch glimpses of people peeking through their curtains as he left for a walk. A few of them stopped returning his waves. Then came the complaints, anonymous, of course. A note tucked under his windshield wiper. "This is a family neighborhood. Participate or leave." A scribbled letter in his mailbox. "We all do our part. Stop being selfish." Jerry found himself grinding his teeth at the sheer pettiness of it. He wasn't loud. He didn't throw parties. He kept his place clean. What was their problem? His patience snapped when he received an official-looking fine. It was tucked into an envelope stamped with the HOA's seal, demanding $250 for failure to maintain property aesthetics in accordance with community standards. That was it. Jerry wasn't playing this game anymore. He stormed over to the HOA office, a small brick building near the entrance of the neighborhood. Inside, behind a polished wooden desk, sat Brenda Holloway. She was exactly what Jerry expected, a woman in her mid-50s with an air of authority so thick it was practically suffocating. Perfectly pressed blouse, sharp eyes, and a polite but icy smile. She glanced up from a stack of papers as Jerry entered. "Mr. Parker," she said smoothly. "I was wondering when we'd have the pleasure of speaking in person." Jerry dropped the fine onto her desk. "What the hell is this?" Brenda barely glanced at the paper. "A notice of violation." "You know damn well I'm not part of the HOA," Jerry said, voice tight. "You have no right to fine me for anything." Brenda folded her hands neatly on the desk. "Mr. Parker, you may not be a formal member, but you are still a resident in this community. The standards we enforce exist for the good of everyone. We can't have one homeowner disregarding them while the rest of us follow the rules, can we? Jerry clenched his jaw. I don't have to follow your rules. Brenda's smile didn't waver, but her voice turned sharper. I strongly encourage you to reconsider. Refusing to cooperate won't be in your best interest. Jerry stared at her, feeling a slow burn of anger in his chest. Are you threatening me? Brenda tilted her head, still smiling. Not at all. I'm simply reminding you that it's always easier to be part of the community than to stand against it. Jerry had heard enough. He turned and walked out without another word. As he reached his front door that evening, he found another anonymous note stuck to it. Join, or you'll regret it. The letters didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. Every time Jerry checked his mailbox, it was overflowing with envelopes, some with official-looking fines, others with vague warnings about non-compliance and failure to uphold community values. They all came with the HOA's seal, but none had any legal authority. Jerry knew it was all intimidation, a desperate attempt to pressure him into joining. But then it got personal. One morning, Jerry stepped outside and immediately stopped in his tracks. His front yard was covered in garbage, bags of trash, broken branches, and even an old tire dumped right in the middle of his driveway. It wasn't there the night before. Someone had gone out of their way to make a mess. Jerry's stomach tightened as he scanned the street. The neighborhood was as picture-perfect as ever: manicured lawns, clean sidewalks, not a single piece of trash in sight. His house was the only one that had been targeted. He grabbed a pair of gloves and spent the next hour cleaning up, his frustration boiling over with every handful of garbage he tossed into the bin. As he worked, he noticed curtains shifting in windows, neighbors pretending not to watch. None of them offered to help. None of them even acknowledged what had happened. By the time he finished, Jerry had made up his mind. He wasn't just going to sit back and let this continue. That evening, he installed security cameras. He mounted them discreetly around the property, one covering the driveway, another facing the porch, and a third watching the backyard. The next time someone tried to mess with him, he'd have proof. And it didn't take long. A week later, it happened again. Jerry woke up to find another pile of garbage dumped in his yard, this time even worse. Rotten food, ripped bags spilling onto the grass, a smashed cardboard box soaked with some unknown liquid. The stench was awful. Furious, he immediately checked the footage. His hands tightened into fists as he watched the screen. 3 figures, hooded and dressed in dark clothes, moving quickly under the cover of night. They carried trash bags, tossing them onto his property before slipping back into the shadows. It was deliberate, coordinated. Jerry rewound the footage, pausing to get a closer look. No clear faces. The hoods obscured them completely. But one of them, their build seemed familiar. A sick realization settled in his gut. They weren't just random vandals. They were from the neighborhood. Jerry grabbed his phone and called the police. An officer arrived later that morning, taking notes as Jerry played the footage for him. It's obvious someone's targeting me, Jerry said, jaw tight. And I think I know who's behind it. The officer sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. The footage helps, but without clear faces, we can't prove who did it. Even if they're from the HOA, unless they're caught in the act, there's not much we can do. Jerry exhaled sharply. So that's it? You're telling me to just deal with it? I'm saying, the officer said carefully, that people like this, they want a reaction. If you push back too hard, they'll push harder. He handed Jerry a copy of the police report. We'll file it, but if anything escalates, call us again. Jerry shut the door after he left, his jaw clenched. He didn't have time to wait for something worse. If the HOA wanted a fight, they had just gotten one. Jerry had begun to expect the harassment, the fines, the threats, the garbage dumped in his yard. But even after everything, nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. It was early morning when he woke to a deep, rumbling noise. Groggy, he rubbed his eyes, trying to place the sound. A truck? Machinery? It was too loud, too close. Something was off. Then he heard metal clanking. His stomach dropped. He threw off the blankets and rushed to the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. A demolition crew had pulled up in front of his house. A massive excavator stood in his driveway, its long arm hovering dangerously close to his front porch. 2 workers were unloading tools, while another walked toward the house carrying a clipboard. Jerry bolted down the stairs and yanked open the door. Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing? He shouted, marching straight toward them. The man with the clipboard barely glanced up. Morning, sir. We're here to begin demolition. Jerry's pulse pounded in his ears. What? Who the hell authorized this? The worker flipped through the papers, completely unfazed. This structure has been deemed unsafe by the Lakeside Homeowners Association. The order states it requires immediate removal. Jerry stared at him, struggling to process the words. This is my house. I'm not part of the HOA. You have no right to be here. The worker gave him a bored look. Sir, we have the proper paperwork. If you have an issue, take it up with the HOA. We're just following orders. Jerry's hands curled into fists. Orders. There was only one person who could have orchestrated this. Brenda. Without another word, he whipped out his phone and called his lawyer. They're trying to demolish my house, he said the second Jonathan picked up. They brought in equipment. Workers. This is happening right now. What? Jonathan's voice sharpened. Jerry, listen to me. They have no legal authority to do that. I'll call the police and meet you there. Don't let them start. Jerry ended the call and turned back to the workers, fury burning in his chest. You need to stop. Right now. The workers sighed, as if Jerry was being unreasonable. Sir, we have a job to do. Jerry stepped in front of the excavator. If you touch my house, I'll sue every single one of you personally. And the cops? They're already on their way. That got their attention. The man hesitated, glancing at the other workers. The engine of the excavator idled, waiting for the next command. Tension hung thick in the air. And then, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the silence. Jerry exhaled sharply as a police cruiser pulled up, followed closely by Jonathan's car. Two officers stepped out, their eyes sweeping the scene. The heavy machinery, the workers, Jerry standing defiantly in front of his home. One officer walked straight over. Can someone explain what's going on here? Jerry shoved a finger toward the workers. They're trying to tear down my house. Without my consent. They claim they have HOA approval, but I'm not part of the HOA. The officer's expression darkened. Do you have any proof of this demolition order? The clipboard guy hesitated before handing over the papers. The officer scanned them, frown deepening. These aren't from the city. These are from a private organization. He looked up. That's not legally binding. The workers shifted uncomfortably. We were just following the job order. Your job is over, the officer said coldly. Shut it down. Now. Reluctantly, the workers started packing up. The excavator's engine rumbled to a stop. Jerry finally let out the breath he'd been holding. Then, as if on cue, Brenda appeared. She stood near the sidewalk, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. When Jerry's eyes met hers, she smiled. That smug, calculated smile that made his fists clench. The officer turned toward her. Miss Holloway, do you have anything to say about this? Brenda tilted her head innocently. I was simply acting in the best interest of the community. We issued multiple notices about the structural concerns with this property. Jonathan cut in sharply, which were legally meaningless. This house is not under your authority. You sent a demolition crew to destroy private property, knowing full well you had no jurisdiction. Brenda's expression didn't change. If Mr. Parker had chosen to work with us, this misunderstanding could have been avoided. Jerry took a step closer, voice low and furious. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a message, and you just lost. For the first time, Brenda's confident smile flickered. The officers took statements, filed reports, and warned the HOA that any further actions against Jerry would result in criminal charges. The demolition crew left, the heavy machinery rolling out of the driveway, and just like that, the immediate threat was gone. But Jerry knew better. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Jerry knew the HOA wouldn't stop, but after the attempted demolition, he realized he needed to go on the offensive. The fines, the threats, the harassment, it was all a game of power, and Brenda had been winning because she controlled the narrative. But now, he had something she couldn't bury. He had proof. Jonathan helped him organize everything: the fake fines, the vandalism, the anonymous threats, the video footage of hooded figures dumping trash on his property, and of course, the insane stunt they pulled by trying to demolish his house. It was a clear case of harassment, and the best way to fight back was to make it public. He reached out to a local news station, and within a day, a reporter named Sarah Carter called him back, eager to cover the story. This is exactly the kind of abuse of power people need to know about, she said over the phone. Are you comfortable doing an on-camera interview? Jerry didn't even hesitate. Let's do it. 2 days later, a camera crew arrived at his home. The interview took place on his half-rebuilt deck, with the creek behind him and the HOA's neatly kept neighborhood in the distance, a perfect contrast between freedom and control. Jerry walked Sarah through everything, showing her the footage, the garbage attacks, the bogus fines, and the police report from the demolition attempt. He didn't hold back. "These people have been harassing me for months because I refused to join their ridiculous HOA," he said into the camera. "They tried to fine me, threaten me, even destroy my home, all because I wouldn't let them control me." The segment aired that night, and it exploded. The reaction was immediate. Online forums, local Facebook groups, even Reddit picked it up. People were furious. Comments flooded in, with hundreds of homeowners sharing their own horror stories about HOAs abusing their power. It wasn't just Jerry's battle anymore. He had tapped into something bigger. But the HOA wasn't about to roll over. The very next morning, Brenda appeared on a rival news station. Dressed in a perfectly pressed navy suit, she sat stiffly in front of a bookshelf lined with law books, an obvious attempt to look authoritative. Her voice was calm, professional, rehearsed. "This is not about control," she said smoothly. "The Lakeside Homeowners Association exists to protect the quality of life and property values of this community. Mr. Parker's refusal to engage in cooperative discussions has created unnecessary conflict, and frankly, his actions are harming the neighborhood." Jerry nearly threw his coffee at the TV. "Unbelievable." Brenda twisted the story, painting herself as the reasonable one, the HOA as a victim of an uncooperative homeowner who refused to follow basic standards. But it wasn't just talk. That same afternoon, Jerry received a lawsuit, filed by the HOA. The document was as absurd as it was infuriating. The HOA accused Jerry of damaging the community's reputation, refusing to maintain property standards, and failing to contribute to neighborhood well-being. They demanded he either join the HOA and pay all back fees or vacate the property. And on top of that, they were suing him for damages. Thousands of dollars in so-called community losses. Jerry didn't even bother getting angry this time. He expected this move. Instead, he forwarded everything to Jonathan. "Countersue," he said simply. And so they did. Within days, Jerry's legal team filed a massive countersuit against the HOA for harassment, trespassing, attempted property destruction, and emotional distress. The lawsuit outlined everything from the illegal fines to the vandalism, to the fact that they literally tried to demolish his house. It wasn't just about money. It was about making them pay for what they did. Now, it was Jerry versus the HOA. And this time, he wasn't backing down. The day had finally come. Jerry versus the Lakeside Homeowners Association. What started as a petty power struggle had escalated into a full-scale legal battle. And now, standing outside the courthouse, Jerry took a deep breath and steeled himself for what was about to unfold. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Neighbors, reporters, HOA supporters, and people who had been following the case online all filled the seats. Brenda sat at the defense table, her expression unreadable, flanked by a team of expensive, sharp-dressed lawyers. Jerry had Jonathan, his attorney, and a stack of evidence so damning that even the best legal team couldn't spin their way out of it. The HOA had sued Jerry first, claiming he was damaging the community and violating neighborhood standards. But Jerry's countersuit hit twice as hard. He wasn't just defending himself. He was going after them for harassment, trespassing, and attempted property destruction. The trial was no longer about whether or not Jerry had the right to opt out of the HOA. It was about whether the HOA had weaponized their power to punish him for it. The opening statements were tense. The HOA's lead attorney spoke first, painting Jerry as a defiant troublemaker who refused to respect community values. "The HOA is simply enforcing rules designed to protect property values," he argued. "By ignoring these standards, Mr. Parker has created unnecessary division, leading to tension among residents." Jonathan countered with the cold, hard facts. "This isn't about community standards. This is about harassment. The HOA attempted to illegally fine my client, vandalized his property, and even hired a demolition crew to destroy his home, all without any legal authority. This case isn't about neighborhood harmony. It's about abuse of power." And then, the real battle began. Jerry took the stand first. He told his story from the beginning, detailing how the HOA first tried to pressure him into joining, then escalated to harassment, false fines, threats, and finally, attempted demolition. His voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the anger underneath. Jonathan presented video footage from Jerry's security cameras, showing hooded figures dumping trash on his property. The police report confirmed that Jerry had filed multiple complaints. Then came the fines, dozens of letters demanding money for fabricated violations, all sent despite the fact that Jerry was not legally part of the HOA. The jury watched in silence. Then came the biggest blow. Jonathan called a former HOA board member to the stand, someone who had resigned months ago, right before things escalated. She looked nervous as she took her seat, glancing once at Brenda before clearing her throat. "I want to make something clear," she said. Not everyone on the board agreed with what happened. But Brenda, she hesitated, then continued. She was determined to make Mr. Parker comply, no matter what. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Jonathan stepped forward. "Are you saying Brenda targeted Mr. Parker specifically?" The woman nodded. She saw his refusal to join as a threat. "She told us, if we let him get away with this, others will think they can, too." That's when the fine started. Then the letters. When that didn't work, things got worse. Jonathan's voice was calm, but the trap had been set. By things got worse, do you mean the vandalism? The threats? The demolition attempt? The witness hesitated, then nodded. Brenda's attorney immediately objected, but the damage had been done. Someone from the inside had just confirmed what Jerry already knew. This wasn't about community rules. This was a personal vendetta. Brenda was next on the stand. Her lawyers had coached her well. She spoke with confidence, insisting that the HOA's actions were only meant to maintain order and that she had never authorized any illegal activity. She denied knowing anything about the vandalism or the harassment, shifting blame onto rogue board members and even suggesting that Jerry himself had escalated the situation. Jonathan let her talk. Then, when the time was right, he pounced. "You said the HOA never tried to force Mr. Parker to comply, correct?" Brenda nodded. "Correct." Jonathan walked to the evidence table and picked up one of the HOA's letters, one of the more aggressive ones. He handed it to her. "Can you read the highlighted portion?" Brenda's eyes flickered as she looked down. Her mouth tightened. She hesitated. Jonathan read it for her. "Noncompliance with community standards may lead to unnecessary complications. You don't consider that a threat?" Brenda opened her mouth, then closed it. Jonathan stepped closer. "Let's talk about the demolition order. You claim the HOA was within its rights to issue a notice condemning Mr. Parker's home." Brenda nodded quickly. "Yes, based on an inspection." Jonathan turned back to the table, picking up another document. "Right. The inspection that was conducted without the homeowner's consent, without city approval, and, oh, look at that, by a contractor who was a personal friend of yours." Brenda's face paled. "Would you like to explain that, Ms. Holloway?" Silence. The courtroom was dead quiet. Jonathan gave her a long look before turning to the judge. No further questions. The jury deliberated for hours. Each passing minute felt like an eternity. Brenda sat stiffly at the defense table, her hands folded so tightly that her knuckles were white. Jerry, for the first time in months, felt hope. Then the verdict came in. The foreman stood and cleared his throat. "In the case of Parker versus the Lakeside Homeowners Association, we find in favor of the plaintiff." Jerry exhaled sharply, his chest finally loosening. The ruling was brutal for the HOA. Not only did they lose the case, but they were ordered to pay Jerry a massive settlement, including damages for harassment, emotional distress, and legal fees. The total? Over $500,000. Brenda's face was a mask of disbelief. But the judge wasn't done. The Lakeside Homeowners Association is also permanently prohibited from attempting to enforce rules or fines against Mr. Parker and must issue a public statement retracting all claims made against him. The gavel hit the desk. Case closed. Jerry had won. But the fight wasn't over yet. The real question was, what would happen next? The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the verdict sank in. Jerry sat still for a moment, letting the words, "We find in favor of the plaintiff," settle in. He had spent months battling against an organization that had tried to bully, harass, and even destroy his home. Now, finally, it was over. The HOA had lost. Brenda's expression remained frozen, but Jerry could see the tension in her clenched jaw, the way her fingers gripped the edge of the table. The ruling was a disaster for her. Not only was the HOA ordered to pay over $500,000 in damages, enough to cripple their finances, but they were also barred from ever attempting to enforce rules or fines against Jerry again. But the biggest blow? The HOA had to issue a public statement admitting fault. The judge's words were clear. The Lakeside Homeowners Association must retract all claims made against Mr. Parker and acknowledge that its actions were taken without legal authority. For an HOA built on power and control, this was worse than the financial loss. It was public humiliation. Outside the courthouse, Reporters swarmed Jerry as he stepped into the sunlight. Cameras flashed, microphones were shoved toward him, and voices overlapped with questions. "Mr. Parker, how do you feel about the verdict? What message does this send to HOAs across the country?" Jerry took a deep breath. He hadn't prepared a speech. He hadn't expected to actually win this big. But he knew exactly what to say. "I stood up for myself because I refused to be bullied," he said, his voice steady. "The Lakeside HOA thought they could push me around, fine me into submission, even destroy my home to make me fall in line. They were wrong. No one is above the law, not even an HOA." The clip went viral within hours. News outlets across the country picked up the story, and the public reaction was overwhelming. Social media exploded with support. Homeowners flooded comment sections with their own HOA horror stories, and legal experts debated how this case could set a precedent for fighting back against overreaching associations. But inside Lakeside, things were falling apart. The very next day, Brenda resigned as HOA president. 2 other board members followed, and within a week, the HOA was in complete disarray. Without its key enforcers, the organization was left scrambling to repair the damage, not just financially, but reputationally. Residents who had blindly supported the HOA before were now questioning everything. Some were furious that the board had wasted HOA funds on a personal vendetta. Others, who had silently disapproved of Brenda's tactics, now felt emboldened to push for change. For Jerry, though, the real victory wasn't just the courtroom win. It was the silence. No more threatening letters. No more garbage dumped in his yard. No more harassment. For the first time since moving in, Jerry could finally breathe. But the fight had left its mark. His once idyllic vacation home had been turned into a battleground, and now, even with the lawsuit won, he wasn't sure it would ever feel the same. Was it even worth staying? He had no answer to that yet. All he knew was that for now, the HOA had lost. And for the first time in months, he could sit on his deck, listen to the creek, and enjoy what he had fought so hard to keep. Justice had been served. For the first time in months, Jerry woke up without tension sitting in his chest. No letters in the mailbox, no threats, no surprise fines, no HOA lurking in the background waiting for their next move. The war was over, and he had won. The settlement money had been more than just compensation. It was a reminder that he had stood his ground and refused to be bullied. He used part of it to repair what the HOA had tried to destroy. The deck that once felt like a war zone was now refinished, stronger than before. He repainted the exterior, fixed minor damages, and added security upgrades, not because he feared retaliation, but because he wanted the peace of mind of knowing that no one could mess with him again. The rest of the money? He put it away, knowing he'd never need to worry about HOA legal fees again. He even donated a portion to a legal fund for homeowners fighting against abusive HOAs, turning his own battle into something that could help others. But the real victory wasn't about the money. Sitting on his deck, Jerry watched as the sun dipped below the treetops, casting golden light over the creek. He took a deep breath, listening to the rustling of the leaves, the distant chirping of crickets, and the soft bubbling of the water below. This was what he had fought for. The HOA had tried to take his home, his peace, his sense of security. But they failed. They lost. He thought about how much had changed since the day he first moved in, believing he was simply buying a quiet escape. He hadn't expected a battle. He hadn't expected to become a symbol for homeowners everywhere. And yet, he had. His fight had mattered, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been bullied by people who thought their power made them untouchable. He had proved that no one was above the law, not even an HOA drunk on control. He leaned back in his chair, a glass of whiskey in hand, and let out a slow, satisfied breath. For the first time since this nightmare began, he could sit here, undisturbed, in his home, on his land, living by his own rules. This wasn't just a legal victory. It was a moral one, and it was his.